Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of April in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Trump's team races to finalise the scale and scope of so-called reciprocal tariffs ahead of today's announcement.
The UK says it will take a calm and pragmatic approach to US levies that could knock more than 1% off GDP.
Plus, facing a bitter pill, why Trump's threat of tariffs on big pharmaceutical companies could cause more than a headache for European drug makers.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
President Donald Trump and his team are said to still be finalising their plans for so-called reciprocal tariffs to be unveiled later today. Sources have told Bloomberg that several proposals are under consideration. They include a tiered tariff system where countries would face an across-the-board levy of 10 or 20%. The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump officials are studying a more targeted option of less than 20% on a smaller group of countries, while Fox News says a flat 20% global tariff is also being considered. Here's Bloomberg editor Jill Desus with more.
The Trump administration has kind of pointed to various countries, whether that be China, obviously Canada, Mexico, the European Union, which have been subject to tariffs in the past, as ones that they're really looking at here, Japan, India. I mean, you've got a lot of major trading partners with the United States that could be considering some kind of reciprocal action.
Trump's tariffs will take effect immediately after they are announced, with the event due to start at 4 p.m. New York time or 9 p.m. in London. We'll have full coverage of the announcement on Bloomberg Radio and further analysis and reporting across Bloomberg's platforms.
More Fed policymakers have been weighing in on the impact of Trump's tariff plan ahead of today's announcement. The Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin says President Trump's tariffs could raise both inflation and unemployment, creating a big challenge for the central bank.
I think you are going to see challenges on the inflation side. I also think you're going to see challenges on the employment side. And that, of course, creates challenges for us from the monetary policy side, because the business is a lot easier if you're doing a framework in 2019 and unemployment is low and inflation's low. It's harder if things move the other direction.
Barkin's comments were echoed by Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee. Speaking to Fox News, he said a slowdown in consumer spending or business investment as a result of tariffs would, quote, be a bit of a mess.
Like other countries, the UK is bracing for tariffs despite efforts to secure an exemption from the measures. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, told the Cabinet she'd spoken to the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Monday, while the Prime Minister promised a calm and pragmatic approach. Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says he still hopes a deal might be done after the tariffs are imposed.
Look, only the President will himself know exactly what action the US is going to take tomorrow. And you're right to say it might not be possible for any country in the world to be exempted from the initial announcements. But I do believe the work we've done means the UK is in the best possible position of any country to potentially reach an agreement.
Reynolds led the trade negotiations in Washington. Bloomberg Economics estimates that Britain faces a 1.1% drop in GDP if it's subjected to a tariff increase of 25 percentage points, which would cut exports to the US by 70%.
The uncertainty around the tariff plan continues to worry markets. 3 of Wall Street's most reliable bulls have said that they were too optimistic in their estimates for the S&P 500 this year. And gold is near a record high after its best quarter since 1986. CBOE head of derivatives market intelligence, Mandy Xu, says the risk has changed from being stock-specific to wider fears around growth.
Investors have come to the realization that tariffs are not a one-time event, right? They are very much a ever-present risk with the Trump administration. So whatever happens, yes, it is meaningful, but let's not kid ourselves. Could we get a change in policy, change in tariff rates, a week, a month, a year from now? Certainly.
Mandy Xu there, speaking as the US market closed. Despite that, every major strategist tracked by Bloomberg still anticipates a rise in the S&P 500 between now and the end of the year.
A candidate backed by Elon Musk lost an election to Wisconsin's Supreme Court despite the world's richest man pouring tens of millions of dollars into the campaign. Susan Crawford, who was supported by Democrats, defeated former state Attorney General Brad Schimmel. The result may have major implications for future cases, including on abortion rights and labour laws, as well as for congressional redistricting plans ahead of next year's midterm elections. Meanwhile, in Florida, Republicans held on to 2 House seats in a pair of special elections, but with much smaller margins than the party's candidates won in November's vote.
Now, according to a new Washington Post report, the White House is assessing the cost of taking over Greenland. It's the most significant effort yet to realise President Trump's desire to acquire the Danish island. Here is Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo with more.
On his recent controversial visit to Greenland, US Vice President J.D. Vance criticised Denmark and said American control would be a lot better economically for the island's 57,000 residents. Now it seems the Trump administration is taking the first steps towards making that a reality. The Washington Post reports that one option being considered is offering a better deal to Greenland and the Danes, who currently subsidise services on the island at a rate of about $600 million annually. That's despite Greenland's new Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen saying the Arctic island won't become American. Donald Trump has repeatedly said that the US will get Greenland and didn't rule out the use of force in a recent interview with NBC News. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Meta is ramping up work on a deluxe version of its smart glasses. The new model, codenamed Hypernova, will feature hand gesture controls and a screen for displaying photos and apps. It could be introduced as early as this year with an expected price tag of over $1,000, according to Meta employees. The company is already working on a second generation version, Hypernova 2, with a binocular display system planned for 2027.
Those are some of our top stories for you this morning. Looking at the markets, traders grappling with the possibility of sweeping tariffs. A lot of uncertainty in markets this morning, it seems. Asian stocks, though, are mixed. The Topix is down 0.4%. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is down 0.2%. Chinese indices, though, seeing some small gains. The CSI 300 up by 0.1%. 10-year Treasury yields adding a couple of basis points at 4.19. Goldman Sachs picks the yen as its top hedge against US recession and the risks from tariffs. The dollar is weakening this morning against most major currencies. The euro little changed. Gold steady after the market has seems to be taking a breather from the record-setting run. Gold trades at $3,115 and oil is also pausing, just up barely about 0.1% for WTI crude futures. So those are the markets this morning.
Well, in a moment we'll get you fully briefed on today's tariff announcements with our trades czar Brendan Murray. Plus we'll be speaking to our reporter Naomi Kresge about how the pharmaceutical industry is high on the list of tariff targets as well. But another story that caught our eye this morning, which perhaps if you're either a regular listener or someone who's been following this story closely might identify with, our opinion newsletter writer Jessica Carl has been writing about how perhaps we're all a bit sick of the word tariff at this stage. If I have to read the word tariff one more time, Jessica, I've got news for you. Going to be reading and thinking about tariffs perhaps for an awful lot longer. She writes very interestingly, though, about the US ISM manufacturing report and about, this is a kind of on the ground reading. It's a sort of it's a sentiment guide, because this is the what we've seen in the run up to these announcements is a lot of the sentiment indicators tell us that business and consumers are very worried, but it's not really translating into the hard data yet, but often one happens before the other. Yeah, and this is one of the key indicators. So yeah, she writes very interestingly. She also is a fantastic person to read because she puts all the opinion pieces into perspective for you. She also ends with this line, which I think is quite pithy. Just imagine how liberated you'll feel without any money left in your bank account. The kind of negative view there. Indeed. Well, let's talk about the potential shock that could come in that announcement later on today. 4 p.m. in Washington, 9 p.m. in London is when we're expecting it. Our trades czar Brendan Murray is with us to help us get briefed for that. Brendan, good morning. What do we know at this stage about what to expect from Donald Trump later?
What we know is that the administration is still hashing out exactly what this is going to look like. There are several options. One is that he will announce a flat tariff on all major importers. Let's just say it's 20%, and that applies to everyone. That's the idea of the universal tariff that was discussed over the past few months. There's another option that's more of a customized version, where country X gets a 22% tariff and country Y gets a 16% tariff, and every country gets a different number. There's a tier option where you divide countries into 3 different baskets. You get a 15% tariff, you get a 20% tariff, and you get a 25% tariff. One of the other options that seems to be coming together at the last minute is one that's sort of narrower, hits fewer countries, and would have a sort of lower tariff rate applied to these countries. So this is the option that would be least harmful, economists would say, to the global economy. But any way you slice it, none of this looks to be positive for growth or inflation in the short run.
Okay, and is this upending the kind of global trading system? And there could be a major drop in exports then to the US from a whole range of countries. We don't really know how many. What are the risks to those countries?
That's the big question is, how much of a headwind is this going to be for countries that are more reliant on the U.S. market than the U.S. market is reliant on them? That's where President Trump thinks his leverage comes from, is that you will suffer more under this scenario than I will, and therefore I will have leverage over you in negotiations. The other part of this is the administration would argue that this is going to create lots of manufacturing jobs, hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs, Peter Navarro said recently, and that this would rebalance not only the global trading system, but this would restore the wealth of the middle class in the U.S. that's been hollowed out, they would argue, by China over the past few decades.
I suppose in terms of the response, what should we be expecting from other countries as to how they'll deal with this?
Well, we've seen a range of responses leading up to this. The European Union has said it will retaliate in kind, basically in proportion to what they get hit with. Canada has also said that they're going to come out swinging against this as well. Other countries have said, the UK, some countries in Asia, Japan and Korea have said, this is a good opportunity for us to negotiate. We will accept the tariffs that you put on our exports, but this is the beginning of the process, not the end of it. We'll sit down and negotiate the way you would a free trade agreement almost. Those take years and years to negotiate, but this is something that the global trading system took many decades to develop into the form it is in today, and President Trump is trying to rewire that system in a matter of months, if not a year or two.
What are US companies saying about the tariffs and also the broader impact then on the US economy?
US companies are freaking out, and they won't tell you this publicly because they're worried about being attacked, being targeted by the administration. But there are lots of conversations going on behind the scenes that say, yeah, we can understand that this is a negotiating tactic to, help Mexico increase its border security. Fine, that's one approach. But if you really do this, if you really essentially change the rules of the global trading system overnight, that's going to be extremely disruptive. We're going to have to pass those extra costs on to consumers, and ultimately you're going to hurt the very core base of your support that you're trying to help. And that you don't have to talk to too many economists to see that if you believe that this is going to work, that it's going to be at least painful in the short term, and perhaps even longer than that.
Okay, Brenton Murray, our trades are. Thank you very much.
Well, let's focus in on one sector which may be particularly hard hit by tariffs, the pharmaceutical industry. President Trump is potentially planning to impose tariffs on the sector, which could raise prices for life-saving and generic drugs, lead to shortages and also strain healthcare providers, given the complex global supply chains involved. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg senior reporter Naomi Kresge. Naomi, good morning. How much anxiety is there? Good morning. How much anxiety is there in the industry around tariffs, and what do we think the potential hit might be?
I mean, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety right now. If you speak privately to people in the industry, they will say that there's a lot of uncertainty. It's not entirely clear what will be tariffed. People are running various potential scenarios. It's really a situation that the industry hasn't had to face for more than 3 decades because they've been protected from tariffs by a World Trade Association agreement that was designed to limit the impact of things like this on medicines. So there's a lot of confusion about what could be tariffed, if there would be certain carve-outs on essential medicines. And this is an industry that has, in that time, developed a value chain that really goes all around the world. U.S. companies are making drug ingredients in Europe. European companies produce drug ingredients sometimes in the U.S. And so there's, just really a lot of anxiety about what this could mean for companies.
Does this ultimately mean that patients will have to pay more for medicines?
It's, that is a very complex question, and it depends on how the tariffs are imposed. But the short answer, the simple answer would probably be yes. It may not be possible for producers not to raise prices. And looking, particularly, for example, at the generic drug industry, which has slim margins as it is, and they may have little recourse, to return manufacturing to the U.S. It takes 3 to 5 years to build a drug factory. If you already have a drug factory built with, all of the complex regulations that surround pharmaceutical manufacturing in Europe, and you look at the numbers, that may not make sense to move your entire setup to the U.S. And so, higher prices, also maybe potential shortages, and of course, financial strain on providers.
Meanwhile, what do we think companies are doing actually to try to mitigate this possibility? You've been writing, for example, today about pharmaceutical companies moving to Spain. Is this part of a kind of broader shift?
So there has been, for the past decade plus, already a shift toward producing in in markets that are important. So that is one thing that has already been happening and that predates tariffs. The story that came out today was actually about clinical trials and about how Spain has turned itself into a really attractive place for companies to do clinical trials for new medicines. And, we've seen multinationals throughout Europe go to Spain to do these very important studies that are necessary to get approval for medicines. And it's really an example of how a country has been able to build up, a piece of a local pharmaceutical industry, despite a lot of change and broader issues in the industry.
Another story, Naomi, that we know that looks like it could be very significant for the pharmaceutical industry is coming out of the United States. And these are the changes that the new Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been making to the way that the health administration is run in the United States. Some top officials being pushed out in the agency as well. What do we know, and what sort of impact could that have for the pharmaceutical industry?
So my colleagues in the U.S. were following this so closely all day yesterday. RFK Jr. has ousted several top officials. So this includes people who oversee vaccine reviews, drug approvals, tobacco regulation. There have been layoffs of about 10,000 employees. So this has affected and basically gutted entire divisions, including those that are working on sexually transmitted diseases, environmental health, global health. It's just really reshaping the agency. There's also a lot of concern among drug makers about how this will, any knock-on impact that this might have on them, because the FDA is the agency that's responsible for, reviewing new medicines, which is vitally important to the pharmaceutical industry. The agency has previously said that drug and medical device workers will be exempted, but we're really kind of waiting to see how this will shake out for companies.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.